who are joining us for this very, very interesting and we hope thought-provoking event organized by the Global Policy Institute and Bay Atlantic University in Washington, D.C. I am Paolo von Schirach, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Global Policy Institute and as chair of political science and international relations at Bay Atlantic University. We are privileged to have with us today two very distinguished experts in this area of media literacy, and indeed fake news, which kind of now it's become I don't know, a cute way of defining garbage, lies, inappropriate characterization, distortions, whatever. So, but this is kind of a broad generalization. But without further ado, I want to welcome Richard Leiby, who is with the Washington Post. He's a veteran journalist, now an assignment editor, and who joins us from Paris, where he's there for important personal reasons. But again, so maybe he can provide some perspectives from the other side of the Atlantic. And Cenk Karatas, who is both Global Policy Institute fellow and faculty at Bay Atlantic University, where he indeed teaches this very subject of media literacy and fake news. So today's topic, of course, is an attempt to dig into the proliferation of rather weird and strange theories, conspiracy theories, and what have you, surrounding this major world crisis that we are all immersed in, which is COVID, which is coronavirus. And the challenge, I guess, for all of us, members of the public, is how do we get any orientation? Who do we listen to? Where's the authority? Who is in charge? Or is the latest video on the internet that has 5 million clicks the new reality about all this? Who knows? But let me just, before I turn to my guests here, I just want a little bit of digging back into history. I remember when I first came to the United States, there were 3 networks, right? You know this, Richard, very well. There was ABC, CBS, and NBC. Yes. And I still remember, Walter Cronkite, who was more than an anchor and journalist. He was like a medicine man, so to speak. He was the authority, and he would end his broadcast every night with the words, "And that's the way it is," and that's final. If Cronkite said it, that's it. And nobody, I would think, in general, would say, "Oh, Cronkite lied to us tonight." He fed some weird junk because he wants to, create confusion within the American public. So there was a certain reassurance on the part of the American public that what was fed to them by the official, news providers, which at that time were the main networks, was, quote, the truth. And that was that. And when Cronkite ended his broadcast saying, "And that's the way it is," that was final. There was no, additional, footnotes or disclaimers or clarifications. So that was that. Of course, now we are in a completely different era. But I'm going to turn it over to our guests. Do you want to open up, Richard? Any initial thoughts, and then we'll turn to Cenk.
Yes. I want to talk about conspiracies because there's so many out there about this pandemic. Conspiracy theories are at their core quite simple. Conspiracy theories give members of the public a narrative that they have built themselves and which allows them to believe things they want to believe. People have done this for a long time. I always go back to the Kennedy assassination, a horrific, horrendous, world-shaking event carried out by one guy with a bolt-action rifle. Okay, how could it possibly be? No, 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 it's got to be this, it's got to be that, it's got to be a guy in the grassy knoll, it's got to be a man with an umbrella. And in a way, this gives comfort to people. They have things to hold on to, and they can discuss and then contend that they know the truth. Okay, so I believe there's conspiracies around this story, that Bill Gates is behind it, or Tony Fauci is behind it. I think this is part of an ancient way of people soothing themselves to gain control. They must have some sense of control in a story that's uncontrollable. It's very scary out there. You don't know if you're going to live or die. So that's my theory, nutshell theory on conspiracies, as I've been thinking about it. And there's no lack of them. I think, we've seen this. I mean, Cenk certainly could discuss it, and I'll turn it over to him in terms of the finer points of the conspiracies. But we saw this at 9/11 too. It wasn't long before people started to theorize that it was an inside job. In fact, it was the same day, I think. And these theories never left. So people will be talking about the real cause of the COVID-19 infections for decades, if not centuries to come. Cenk, you have any thoughts?
Cenk.
Yes. Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Richard. And this is very classy that you're joining us from Paris, that you got yourself stuck in Paris during this pandemic.
Yes.
Very smart, very smart. Yeah, it's scary out there and people need answers. Everybody needs answers. And answers mean information. We operate with information, obviously. Now, first I want to say that this is a Friday. I'm in my home, and I assume that most of our audience are there in their homes too. So I'd like to call it a casual Friday because we've been hearing a lot of scary stuff about this pandemic. And we pretty much know what to believe, where to look, but still there is something called infodemic, as the World Health Organization put it earlier. Not only a pandemic, but an infodemic, which is that an epidemic of information, a misinformation epidemic all around the world. And why is this happening? Why do we have to deal with this? And how are we going to deal with this? We operate on information. That's what we rely on. We travel, we live, we work, we have our entertainment, everything relies on it. And we rely on it more than ever because, I mean, the truth is the last thing that we look at before we go to sleep at night is probably the screens of our phones. And the first thing that we look at in the morning is, again, the screens of our phones. Those are little eyes for us to the world, to the outside world, where we get our information. Our 5 senses are not enough anymore. So we need those little gadgets. And whatever comes through those gadgets, we tend to believe, as Paolo put it from decades past, that we tend to believe those because we tend to believe that there is an authority associated with it. Now, the virus is obviously a disruption. It's a disruption for our lives. It's a crisis, and it's a disruption on many levels. On one level, it's very direct to hundreds of thousands of people, even millions of people, that we get sick, our loved ones get sick. We hear that they are in hospital, tied to ventilators. So it's really scary. That's the direct effect on us. But on another level, and this is why we are experiencing this, is that people look around and it seems like everything's fine because there is an invisible enemy and there is no clear narrative, an explanation that suits us, as Richard put it. Now, this disruption by its nature, making people sick, but we don't have a solution to deal with it. We cannot solve it, but we have to deal with it. That's how we survive. And we need to know, if we know it, if we know what's in the darkness, then we have a way to soothe ourselves and go to sleep. If we cannot know it, we struggle. We have adrenaline for that reason. So the need to know is very connected to the need of survival. Let's say that we have a an outbreak of war or a military threat on us. Now, first, what do? We look at the military institutions, the institutions who are responsible to take care of it. They should have the means to deal with it, and they must have been prepared. They should have the tanks and armies and weapons. And if those institutions are not prepared, or worse than that, if they don't believe that there is even an attack, then what do? In the case of a military threat, we try to deal with it ourselves, probably, because it's a threat of existentialism. So we do it with whatever we have on hand. So we turn to unreliable sources, we turn to hearsay, we turn to unverified information. Before I give it back to Paolo, now I want to say that probably the biggest inventions of humankind is lying. Lying is a form of creating an alternative reality. You create a reality that you build yourself, and it's, what a coincidence, a story. And again, what a coincidence. We journalists, we don't make news, we write stories, we make stories. In a newsroom, I know that, like, I'm sure Richard knows this, that we never said news or anything like that. We say stories. We come up with stories because we know that we create some realities for the readers. We cannot simulate a perfect reality in the story. So lying is a way to create an alternative reality to comfort ourselves, to reach a goal that we may have. We may lie to our spouse, we may lie to our kids, or we may lie to the public. So it's a way to deal with the crisis. And when it comes back to me, I can talk a little bit more about the conspiracy theory.
I just wanted to thank you, Cenk. I just wanted to throw this back again at both of you, especially Richard. You know, I think lying usually tends to imply some kind of a deliberate, conscious action, like somebody is really making something up for whatever reason. Here, I think there's also kind of a twilight area in which people believe stuff because they want to believe something, because they want to have some explanation about something terrible. And as Richard pointed out, the Kennedy assassination, we've been talking about it for half a century. And still, there will be some people today who are dissatisfied or unconvinced that things happen in Dallas precisely the way they happened, that Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy. No, there has to be something else. So there is a deliberate lying, and that could be propaganda of one kind or another. And then there is this desire to find answers, and therefore you latch onto whatever figment there may be. That's my own take here. Please, gentlemen, you chime in, and then you know, you make something up, not necessarily as a deliberate lie, although that can be the case, but as a desperate attempt to find a causation. This thing, the coronavirus, is unknown. And so the first thing people say, oh, then it's man-made because it doesn't exist in nature. So we have no immunity. So somebody made it. And therefore, if somebody made it, why did they make it? What was the nefarious purpose? Did it escape from the lab in Wuhan? No, it was deliberately, manufactured to cause a world chaos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Richard, what's your take on this?
Well, let me say that there's a political equivalent here. People are spinning the virus the same way they would spin a candidate. By that I mean to say, well, you had the president calling it the Chinese virus, okay, to kind of put some distance between him and what was happening. All the while, he was presenting a very rosy view that the virus would go away. Okay, there were others out there of different political stripes who were, being much more realistic and saying, no, we've got to deal with this. And it's become a very divisive political issue. I mean, whether you wear a mask or not, as you've seen between the Biden and Trump, Biden, wore a mask at a Memorial Day ceremony, and Trump made some mocking comments. There are people out there who insist that the masks are ineffective and they're politically correct, and they're more on the obviously they lean toward the right wing. Although you can also have people who are on the extreme left who don't want to have anything to do with any authority to begin with. So you see a lot of that, and you also see people profiting. I mean, profiting politically. I think there's no tragedy too horrible for politicians not to exploit. And this tragedy of 100,000 dead that we can count is horrific. Yet it's become a political talking point. Okay, the president just wants to open up the country so he can get reelected when the economy strengthens. Okay, that's one way of spinning it, and his people are spinning it that no, people have the right to work. I got off the phone just not long ago with the political operative that I've known for quite a while, and he was representing a construction guy up in Michigan. Now, Michigan has been a battleground over this issue. They have a Democratic governor up there, and some people on the right feel that she's been too stringent. And so this guy hired a Washington, D.C. a political strategy firm or PR firm. Actually, they're in Virginia. But the point was to get him out there. And guess what? He became the guy who was saying, "Take yourself to work day," okay, which is a phrase coined by my friend. Take yourself to work, which came to indicate, okay, we have the right to work. We're losing our jobs, and they got him on billboards, TV shows, AP, USA Today, New York Times. So there's political spin behind everything, and it shouldn't be surprising since this is the age we're in. Anyway, I wanted to make that point that you can spin the virus and you can spin the issues, and I think it's quite unfortunate that divide has emerged, because this is something that should be scientifically dealt with. But as Paolo said, people are not going to be they're going to deal with it in a sense emotionally, to have something to hold on to. Anyway, that's my take on politics.
But let me ask you something else. I mean, politics, I think we understand, and that people want to try to use this as a political weapon. After all, we have a presidential elections in a few months, and so that's kind of understandable. But let me throw this at both of you. When people say, "Oh, this is all about the vaccine conspiracy," it's Bill Gates who's behind all this, because what he's really want to do is to vaccinate the whole world about everything, which is a way of exerting control over mankind. And that somehow Bill Gates perhaps made coronavirus, okay? And this has been said, so that he can then push a vaccine, and then he, with his network and his foundation and whatever, he can impose vaccinations all over the world, and this becomes a way to control humankind. That stuff, I don't quite understand, what the political angle here may be, but this stuff is out there. Cenk, what do you think of this?
Because people don't like those people. Because the problem is, we know everything. We know everything. There is nothing that we don't know. We know everything. If you ask anyone about anything, they have an opinion on it. And there is very little difference between their opinions and facts according to them. Every opinion is a fact for the holder of that opinion. And now that the digital media is everywhere, where everybody is using social media, we are now pretty much producers of messages for the mass media. We have the potential to reach millions of people in an instant. Now, this may come handy for exposing some events, incidents in the society on a global level, so that it increases awareness for everyone. But at the same time, it poses risks that in an instant you may go down under and you may spread false information if you're organized enough. I started my speech by saying that this is a multi-level problem. There is the recipient parts, there is the part that we give the message out, and there is also the organized political misinformation or disinformation spread level of this. And this concerns mostly the governments. We have been talking about this for several years, especially since the 2016 elections. And this was expected to be on a high agenda for the coming elections in November. And coronavirus only made this more complicated now. We don't know who is who, we don't know who is working for who, or they're working for anyone anyways. Now, I'm thankful to President Trump that he's been putting these fake news and media literacy related issues to the agenda since yesterday by signing the executive order and getting into an open fight with Twitter, and also now Facebook is a part of it. And it seems that we're going to be talking about this more. Everybody wants to use information for their own interest. The problem is not all the recipients are aware of those interests. And more often than not, those interests are not very clear. They're not opaque. So we need to be vigilant. We need to ask questions. One of the things that we talk about at the university is that, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, but I'm more often than not, I say unfortunately, we are all journalists now. So we need to be in possession of principles of journalism in our daily lives. Whatever we say, it's not interpersonal anymore. Whatever we say has the potential to reach many more people. And information has power, and people want to spread information because, according to a study, more than 80% of people believe that media has immense impact on how people feel and think. But only about 10% of those people think that media has impact on them. So it should be some form of aliens or some non-human organisms who are under that impact, but not these people themselves.
So we had a question from our participants about how. So we're talking now mainly about the United States, I guess, and other sort of open societies, liberal democracies, in which there are multiple sources of information and multiple media, etc. Do countries, say, somebody asked, well, what about China? Can they have conspiracy theories in China? How does that work? Obviously, considering that the regime is different and that they don't have the freedom of, of information that we enjoy here. Do they have conspiracy theories in China, as far as you know?
This is one of the most complicated issues to talk about, because let's be honest, lack of free speech and individual freedoms helped China to deal with COVID-19 epidemic immensely. They backtraced people's interactions through the enormous web of cameras all around the country. Also, they imposed very strict curfews. We have seen those footages. So lack of freedom of speech helped them. But does it mean that we have to follow suit? Does it mean that this should be the norm? We need to trust those who we give the authority to. We need to trust as the public. This is a public health crisis, so it has to be handled accordingly. I told Richard how lucky I think he is because he got stuck in Paris for this pandemic, not because he can enjoy walking around and have some nice French cuisine, but because also around that part of the world, this crisis seems to be managed in a slightly better way, I believe. I have friends in Germany that I'm in contact with, and they've been telling me that there is a very high trust among the public to Angela Merkel in Germany, even though now she's about to leave her post. So she's not obliged at any level to take care of this as she does. But that's what people who are in power need to do. And as storytellers, newsmakers, at least traditional newsmakers like Richard and Washington Post and New York Times, they've been covering this from the beginning with all the twists and changes in narrative and rhetoric. And it's obvious what's been going on. There was a really good article in Washington Post about how the White House has been creating an alternative reality for the COVID-19 using the social media, and whoever is opposing this, be it Twitter, be it anyone else, are under the spotlight for them, and they needed to be targeted, because it's not about the reality anymore, it's about the perception. However you construct the perception for people, it sticks as the reality. Unfortunately, this is the case. Now, as a public crisis, we need to deal with this information crisis to make sure that we find a way for facts to stick and misinformation to go away. There is one theory about this. Now, we have been talking about herd immunity to deal with this virus. And in a very similar fashion, that if we have herd immunity to misinformation, to fake news, by spreading factual, reliable information enough with the support of the public authorities, obviously, then we are going to have a form of immunity. There are studies about this that says that we will get to the bottom of this, because we can never run away from misinformation. There's going to be lies, there's going to be fabrications, some hidden agendas, other countries trying to mingle with our internal issues. So we need to find a way to deal with this. And obviously it's not going to be happening with tanks, and it's not going to be happening by people themselves. We need leadership to deal with this.
Well, let me, yes, something you said earlier, Cenk, you say, when you talk about media literacy, right? The need for media literacy, and therefore for people to become a little bit schooled and therefore skilled in sifting through the myriad of sources of information and news, or fake, some of which is fake or distorted or biased or what have you. You know, this, I don't know if this is really simplistic and kind of throwing our arms up in the air and say, hey, you know, we don't know how to do this. But just going back to even to the origin of this republic, I hope Richard would, you know, agree or maybe disagree. I don't know. But you know, it was Thomas Jefferson who, after all, said you cannot be both ignorant and free, right? And many variations to this effect. In other words, postulating that a modern polity, a republic founded on self-government, was also premised on a certain level of literacy about public affairs and issues and matters of general concern on the part of the average citizen. Not that people, you know, that average citizens would have the brains to be informed and sufficiently knowledgeable, not to be super experts, but sufficiently knowledgeable about the affairs of the day that they could make, you know, informed judgments about them, and therefore be thoughtful participants in the political process. Okay, that was, you know, and that was that. You know, what do we say today? In other words, you teach this subject, Cenk, you know, but how do we handle this? You said everybody now is a journalist, but without the preparation, if you wish, without the how can I say, the sophistication and the ability to say, wait a minute, is that true? Is that not true? How do I make my judgment as to whether I believe this or don't believe this, and share it and retweet it or what have you? So I think we are in a quandary here of an avalanche of information, and the general public that thinks they can understand it and determine what is right and what is wrong, without, quite frankly, it seems to me, having the means and the tools to do that. Any comments on this, both of you? Richard, start with you.
Paolo, I think you make a good point about Jefferson. Jefferson also said famously, "Were it left to me to decide whether to have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would not hesitate to prefer the latter." Then he went on to say, provided, of course, that every person could receive those newspapers and be able to read them. So the literacy is a major part. You know, I get forwarded, videos a lot now. And videos are a method of disseminating information that are incredibly powerful. I don't know why, but you don't have to read them. You just listen and watch the visuals, and then you get influenced by them. So, the medium is the message, as another great philosopher said. I think that we're at a point where the mainstream or establishment media, as the White House calls it, is is imperiled by the fact that it is grasping to explain things in a balanced way in a complicated world and provide a lot of facts. The media are the enemy now. We are the undisputed enemy of the White House. And why is that? Because it sells a point that Trump wants to make to his base, and he's going to continue to pound this point into the general election. It hasn't let up for 4 years. It won't let up. And so we just are, Paolo, you said we're in a different era. Man, we're on a different planet. I mean, as far as I'm concerned.
Let me build on this. Cenk, you mentioned Germany, right? And the fact that sort of implicitly the German public believes what Angela Merkel, the chancellor, who's sort of the CEO, of Germany Inc., tells them. So she has authority, credibility. She says something about this crisis, and the public says, all right, that's what we hear from above, and we trust the people up there. And by the way, this is what the issue of trust in each other and in the public authorities is also a major component of what is generally called the Nordic gold, right? Which is the way in which Scandinavian countries are run on trust, on reliability, lack of corruption, and this and that. Here, as Richard just mentioned, we have created this, unfortunately, this adversarial environment in which the White House has every interest in portraying mainstream media as the enemies and the purveyors of falsehood on a regular basis, because they hate me, President Trump, and so they're going to feed you, the stupid public, junk and the fake news, etc., etc. And of course, it has a certain power, and I'm sure many people believe just that your newspaper, Richard, is owned by Jeff Bezos, who's an enemy of Trump, and therefore who uses it as his little toy to annoy President Trump. And that's the way the White House would describe, in this kind of caricaturesque way, your distinguished news and information, tool, the Washington Post. So here's the thing. I don't know how to formulate this question in a productive way, but how do we recreate trust? In other words, what can be done? And I know this is maybe it's an impossible question, so that the general public has a sense that what comes, especially official information from the authorities, that it is actually the truth, or at least the closest approximation to the truth to the best of the abilities of the people who are presenting it to the public. Is there anything that can be done, or are we just lost in this ocean of confusion where anybody believes anything, nobody believes the government? And in fact, Tony Fauci developed coronavirus because he distorted funds from his institute, and he did something for God knows what reasons. This almost 80-year-old man, he had in mind some kind of a sinister project to create the bioweapons. I mean, this is what's around. So how do we recreate trust in public authorities? Is this and again, with President Trump, we've reached extremes, but it wasn't invented here. Just to remember millions of people during the Obama administration who were absolutely convinced that President Obama was a Muslim interloper who was born in Kenya and imposed upon us to make America into a Muslim country, right? That had wide currency in at least some quarters in the United States. So, Cenk, to you the easy question.
Thank you. Okay, no problem. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of conspiracy theories flying around, and I need to be honest, some of them are really, really funny and clever at the same time, and also profitable. I just heard from a friend of mine that they've been marketing $2 USB memory sticks as the, let me look at my notes for their names, some quantum holographic catalyzer technology bioshield to protect you from the effects of 5G spread of this coronavirus for $400. And they've been making a lot of money. I just checked it right before we went online, and it's still on sale on their website. It's still
Thank
there.
you, because we have a question from the audience just about this and about the 5G threat and coronavirus. Yes.
Okay, all right. I will come to that. It's shocking, let me tell you. Please wait for it.
But what about, again, we have another question about the anti-vaccine movement and this video, which was quite sleek and very well produced regarding Dr. Judy Mikowitz, I think is the name. I'm sure everybody watched it, and it looked really very professional and very sharp and whatever. What do we make of that? That had immediately 5-6 million clicks or more. I don't know where we are now, but just the day of its release. And so everybody was willing to believe this, this conspiracy about vaccines, and she almost overnight became the prophet or the person who warns us against the dangers of all this. What do we make of that too?
That video called Plandemic is very much related to what Richard just said about the impact of video on humans. Now, because they're easy to consume, you're passive, you just sit there and watch, and you are, in a sense, ready to be influenced. And in a video, it can apply to your multiple senses at the same time. When you're reading something, you're just looking at the words and you're processing it with your brain. But when you're watching video, you see the visual image, you hear sounds, the music, and there you are, in a way, connected, in a sense, close to the movie Matrix, as you are connected to an alternative reality. So, and it reaches out to your past experiences, some sensitive areas of human psychology. So that's why video has immense impact on people. But the thing is, they're not going anywhere. They're going to be there. We're discussing deepfakes in our classes, that we can now recreate visual images of people who are speaking words that they never spoke. We can create an alternative reality in that sense. But we're not lost, fortunately. The hope is there, because that's how we survive. We adopt. Technology comes first, because technology is, in a way, to deal with the nature. And the nature of communication has been evolving immensely in the last few centuries. Now we are at a point where we can make this webinar possible online from our houses, and I can see that there are more than 30 people watching this. This is unbelievable, and I cannot even begin to imagine how we would cope with this pandemic 30 years ago without all this technology. So we will take care of this. How? You asked how. Now, everything starts with stopping being passive. If we remain passive, then we become targets. If you don't want to be hit, you need to move, as they say. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean to be on the move all the time, not being passive? If you wanted to learn something in the past, you had to go to the library, you had to pick up the book and look at it. You had to channel your attention to something. The two most valuable resources, this is something that I always say, are time and attention. We don't pay a dime to Facebook as users. We don't pay anything to Twitter as users. So in general, this is something that we say in the media industry, that if you don't pay anything for something, you're probably the product yourself. You're marketed. So the users of this information interaction in the digital media age is that as long as we are passive and open to be influenced, there's going to be brands, there's going to be authorities, states, bad intentioned people, some crooks, they want to influence us. So we have to stop being passive, because media literacy starts with having the ability to access the information. It's not as simple as before. Now, if I have to teach someone to use, to get news from Facebook or Instagram or any other online social media platform, they need to learn how to use it first. So knowing how to access something is the beginning. If you just sit there, it will come to you magically so that you will form your opinion. We want to know. We don't want to learn anymore, because learning is tough. We just want to know. Give me the last page. Now, this reminds me of some world leaders who get bored so easily to read reports on national security, so that they just want to leave not more than 3-4 sentences. Now, this is what is scary. We need to be active in the way that we access the information, and then the information that we access could be opinions, could be speculations. We need to know how to differentiate it from those misinformation or even disinformation. What do we do then? We analyze it. We analyze the information. When I say this in an academic way, it sounds cumbersome. It sounds complicated. It's not complicated. It's like your neighbor telling you something and then you are reacting on that information. If someone blames a friend of yours, you just don't blindly accept it and go and act on it. You ask around, you question it. That's why I'm saying that we are all journalists. And the biggest principle of journalism is asking questions and not believing what you are, and verifying the information that you have, evaluating it. And another important part of this literacy is that we need to create the message ourselves. If we become a sort of distorted mirror to reflect that information, then we become a part of it without ill intent. When I was talking about lying as the biggest invention of human beings, I did not mean that it was deliberately lying. Lying sometimes is for a greater good and done without knowing what's right and what's wrong. So that's why when we are reflecting information without evaluating and without analyzing it and not accessing it properly, we just want it to come to us, then it is the first step of creating misinformation among the society, and the authority losing the trust because they're doing the same thing. President Trump has been talking about banning the social media. It's really funny. For a few days now, And people are asking them, then what's he going to do all day if he bans the social media? Unbelievable. So the issue is not only a cure for the virus itself, we need to find a cure for the mistrust. And it takes more than scientists to work on it, because it's a political issue and it concerns each of us as members of this society.
Well, Richard, to you, I mean, I have a question here from our audience regarding essentially watchdogs. In other words, independent organizations or whatever we want to call them, that can do some of the work that Cenk says it's incumbent upon us, but they can do it for us, if you wish, by filtering through this universe of this myriad of sources and data and whatever, and theories about anything, whether it's coronavirus or anything else for that matter, and be able to tell us, the general public, hey, this is real, this is not real, what have you. We've got some of these NGOs, they do exist, whatever they're doing, whoever funds them, if there's a bias, not a bias, whatever, it's there. But also, I was reading something that it seems, if I'm not mistaken, that Facebook has essentially given up on the idea of sifting through the stuff that they post, because they figured out that they can't do it. I mean, the very act of trying to eliminate, to purge, if you wish, Facebook from the real junk itself creates some kind of bias and discrimination, and itself becomes a problem as opposed to the solution. In other words, Cenk is saying we need media literacy, we need attention, people need to inform themselves, spend some time, question, ask around, see if this matches that. As he said, if somebody says something bad about your friend, you just take it face value, or you try to dig in and figure out what's the matter in reality. So to you, Richard, I mean, you are obviously working for an established and really, how can I say, well-respected major media organization. You're an editor. So obviously you have a huge responsibility in determining what is a story and what is not. Are we going to publish this or not? So there's a huge responsibility based on professional judgment and your own ethical standards. So is that enough? Do we need media watchdogs? Is it possible to corral this whole thing, or is it just hopeless? What's your
Well, first of all, yes, we need media watchdogs, because any human endeavor warrants and can bear under some investigation. So the media itself should be investigated. When you talk about institutions, there are institutions that, for example, in this current pandemic, Johns Hopkins University has become the go-to source for data. I don't know how the consensus emerged, but it would seem to me like they're the ones who prove that they have the wherewithal. How do we regain trust is, to me, simple but complicated. Simple in that we have to remain trustworthy. We have to be the organization that embraces, the next level of fact-checking and fairness. Now, a lot of the public is never going to think that the Washington Post is respectable or has any business other than wrapping fish, but
which is noble by itself.
On my personal level, I can't let that really dig into me too much, because I know how good the editors are, I know how good and responsible the writers are, and I know how much we check. And whenever I get a caller like that or an emailer these days, I say, well, let me just try to convince you that we did this, and there may be an error, which we'll fix. If we have an error, we'll fix it. And sometimes you win over, a person or two, many small victories. But I don't think, we're swimming in an information sewer right now. There's a lot of disgusting and unverified and dangerous content out there that people have to be, sort of be willing to invest the time in sorting out. And we're an educated populace for the most part. So I think that a lot of people are going to do that rather than just succumb to being force-fed information. I mean, but then, you've got the president bringing forth some sort of a conspiracy theory about former Florida Congressman Joe Scarborough that, indicating he killed, or had killed, or, was having an affair with, or something about this intern. It's not, according to the husband or the widower, it didn't happen. According to the autopsy, it didn't happen. So where are we when that kind of story can have currency? I can only answer the question, Paolo and Cenk. I can't answer it. I just know we're not in a good place. And we should sit back every day and look at that.
But yes, I think that's a very sobering comment, Richard. Yes, and I was just about to mention this thing about Joe Scarborough, which is really, really, talk about weird stuff. I mean, that's really super weird of accusing this former congressman of essentially having killed this young woman in his office or something to that effect. And President Trump putting gasoline on the fire of this weird theory because he doesn't like Joe Scarborough, or vice versa, they don't like each other anymore, or whatever. And so you have this really vicious personal attacks and all that. So I know we are touching some lows here that probably, even though this stuff has been around for a long time, but the intensity, the volume, the virulence of all this has probably, what we are experiencing now, especially during coronavirus, is unprecedented. So again, I don't know that we can, as we're getting close to the end of our time here, but I don't know, beyond, Cenk, what you were saying before, which I think, quite frankly, I agree. People have to make the effort. People have to try to educate themselves the best they can. However, the reality is people are busy. People are doing this and that. People have jobs. People have families. They have kids. They've got responsibilities. They've got this and that to do. And they are not going to spend a few hours in the library, or even, now you don't have to go to a physical library, but even researching this and that and verifying and fact checking. They're just not going to do that. So is that, are we really destined to continue to swim in this sewer, as Richard, I like your metaphor. It's a sad one, but I think it's an appropriate one. Is that it? Is that all we've got? I mean, you're teaching this course, but obviously this is for students who are really trying to get a degree and who really want to get some in-depth education. And so obviously what you're doing is very valuable. But we've got a country here of 330 million people, or give or take, not to mention the rest of the world. So where do we go from here? Is that we just destined to be prisoners of this unwieldy environment in which there will be always some voices of restraint and wisdom and fairness, but mixed in chaos with everything else? I mean, is there a way out of this? Or
we need to learn. We need to learn how to pick and choose. It's when I say we need to analyze and have to know how to access, I mean, it's not about having the research for multiple hours. It's knowing who to talk to. When you need someone, the first thing that you want to do is to take care of it. And then you go to the person or the institution who can do this. So when you have a problem with your plumbing, you don't go to an electrician. So when you need information that is reliable, that is factual, you need to check the track record. You need to check the credibility. That's why for the news companies, the most important thing is credibility. They cannot afford to lose it. They need to keep it intact. That's why we need to learn how to pick and choose. Now that the media is a swipe media, we swipe around the news, and once we move towards another thing, it's like a cat video, and then a tragedy on the other side of the world, and another dancing baby, or some such things. One after another, they have influence on us because we don't have any efforts. Now, we know that we operate on information, and that information is out there within that sewer. But that sewer is man-made. We made it possible. So when we need to find the best for us, just like an open buffet that you can eat anything you want, you can go ahead and eat all the junk food, or you can pick and choose. This is pretty much it. It's giving you the options, and you need to know what to consume from where to consume. And human nature pushes you towards some unhealthy decisions. I completely agree with that. That's where the public authority should come in. Do we leave national security to some individuals around the country? No, because this is a serious business. Do we leave education to some people who don't know anything about it or have just opinions about it? No, we have to take care of this issue as if we are dealing with the national security. That's why a public health crisis became a public information crisis, because it was not managed well, so that people needed to swim through that sewer to find some bits of pieces that could be beneficial for their families. And unfortunately, it's not possible. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, we need to know how to access and analyze it, but practically, the information has to be there, reliable and available to the public, funded by the people themselves, and regulated again by the people themselves.
Well, thank you. I guess we're getting to the end here of our time. Thank you, Cenk. Richard, I want to give you the last word before we wrap up, and maybe you have some thoughts about recreating. How to recreate the trust in our institutions. I guess we got elections. That may be a way of obtaining that. Maybe that's going to weigh in, in the political campaign that is unfolding now, even in these unusual circumstances. Your last word for you, Richard. Can you hear me, Richard?
Last word.
Yes.
You're putting too much weight on my shoulders.
A little bit.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes, the screen is fading out here. I think I'm losing power. But anyway, I think that the main thing for anybody listening to do is to heed Cenk's advice and make sure you nail down your facts. Because especially in an epidemic, pandemic, whatever we call it, it is affecting you, it's affecting your family. I mean, do you wear a mask? Do you listen to the guy across the street who says, don't wear a mask? It's really up to you to say, to save your own life. That's what this is about. And if you can't find it in your strength, heart, and will to save your own life, then I really worry, because that's what you should be doing in this case.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in this, I think, thought-provoking, I hope, we all hope, event that give us something to chew on and to basically take our own personal responsibility in how we, how can I say, consume and digest information in this very, very complicated environment and in this unprecedented crisis. So on behalf of the Global Policy Institute and Bay Atlantic University, I thank our distinguished speakers, Richard and Cenk, and I wish you a good weekend. Thank you.
Bon weekend.
Bon weekend, monsieur.